Paris, October 1943. A crowded café on the Rue de Rivoli, thick with cigarette smoke and the nervous energy of occupied France. At a corner table sat Hauptmann Ernst Weber, a Gestapo counterintelligence officer who'd already sent 23 resistance members to their deaths. He was waiting for an informant, a Frenchman who'd promised names in exchange for money. The informant arrived right on time, middle-aged, nervous, ordinary-looking. He approached Weber's table with the cautious respect that all French civilians showed to German officers in 1943. Weber stood to greet him, extending his hand for a businesslike handshake. The Frenchman clasped Weber's hand firmly, professional, polite. Then he clenched his fist. A muffled crack, barely audible over the cafe's din, and Weber's eyes went wide. He staggered backward, clutching his chest as blood spread across his shirt. The Frenchman was already moving toward the door, his right hand still empty, still apparently weaponless. By the time Weber collapsed and the cafe erupted in chaos, the killer had vanished into the Paris streets. German investigators found the bullet wound. They found witnesses who'd seen the handshake, but they found no gun, no weapon drawn, no obvious explanation for how a man could shoot someone while shaking their hand. It was as if the killer's touch itself had been lethal. The answer was strapped to the informant's forearm, hidden beneath his jacket sleeve, a weapon so compact, so perfectly disguised that even the Gestapo officer never saw it coming. The SOE called it the sleeve gun, and it turned every handshake, every casual touch, every moment of human contact into a potential execution. This wasn't a weapon for soldiers. This was a weapon for spies operating in the deepest cover where being caught with a gun meant torture and death. This was assassination made intimate, invisible, and absolutely terrifying. But how do you hide a functional firearm in your sleeve without anyone noticing? Let's go back to the beginning. By 1942, the Special Operations Executive had agents operating throughout Nazi-occupied Europe, men and women living under false identities, gathering intelligence, organizing resistance, and, when necessary, eliminating high-value targets. These agents couldn't carry conventional weapons. A well-wrought pistol was excellent for assassination, but it was still 12 inches long, impossible to carry during a Gestapo checkpoint search. A regular pistol? Even more obvious. The SOE needed something revolutionary. A weapon that could be carried at all times, even during the most invasive searches. Something so well concealed that an agent could walk through a checkpoint, undergo a pat-down, and still have lethal capability on the other side. Something that could kill at the exact moment when a target was most vulnerable and least suspicious. During a greeting, a handshake, a moment of manufactured trust. But how do you hide a functional firearm in your sleeve? Let's go back to the beginning. By 1942, the Special Operations Executive had agents operating throughout Nazi-occupied Europe, men and women living under false identities, gathering intelligence, organizing resistance, and, when necessary, eliminating high-value targets. These agents couldn't carry conventional weapons. A well-wrought pistol was excellent for assassination, but it was still 12 inches long, impossible to carry during a Gestapo checkpoint search. A regular pistol? Even more obvious. The SOE needed something revolutionary, a weapon that could be carried at all times, even during the most invasive searches. Something so well concealed that an agent could walk through a checkpoint, undergo a pat-down, and still have lethal capability on the other side. Something that could kill at the exact moment when a target was most vulnerable and least suspicious. During a greeting, a handshake, a moment of manufactured trust. Enter Station Ikes again, the same brilliant engineers who'd created the Welrod. But this time, the challenge was even more extreme. They needed to create a functional firearm small enough to hide on a person's body in a way that even trained Gestapo searchers wouldn't detect. And it needed to be deployable in seconds, with no obvious drawing motion that would alert the target or nearby guards. The solution was as ingenious as it was disturbing. A single-shot pistol that fired directly forward from a tube strapped to the underside of the forearm, activated by pulling a cord with the opposite hand. No drawing required, no obvious weapon. Just extend your arm, as if offering a handshake or pointing, and fire. The Germans had a name for agents who wielded these weapons: Handschlag murder, handshake murderers. And by 1943, that fear had spread through Nazi counterintelligence networks like a virus. Because if even a handshake could kill you, who could you trust? But before we get to the terror it caused, let's understand the weapon itself. How did Station Ike's engineers pack lethal firepower into something you could hide under a shirt sleeve? The sleeve gun, officially designated as an arm holster pistol in SOE documents, was a masterpiece of minimalist engineering. Strip away everything unnecessary from a firearm and you're left with just the essentials: a barrel, a firing mechanism, and ammunition. The weapon consisted of a metal tube approximately 6 inches long and just over ½ an inch in diameter, about the size of a thick pen. 25 ACP in some variants. Not the most powerful cartridges, but at contact range, pressed directly against someone's body, they were absolutely lethal. The firing mechanism was spring-loaded. A striker pin sat cocked inside the tube, held back by a simple catch. Attached to this catch was a thin cord, typically piano wire or strong fishing line, that ran along the inside of the wearer's arm, across the chest, and terminated at the opposite wrist or hand. When the wearer pulled this cord with their free hand, the catch released, the spring drove the striker forward, and the round fired. The entire device weighed just a few ounces, light enough that it didn't create an obvious bulge under clothing, smooth enough that it felt like nothing more than a slight irregularity if detected during a pat-down. And in 1940s clothing, with its layers and thick fabrics, such irregularities were common. But here's the genius of the mounting system. The sleeve gun attached to the forearm via a leather strap or metal clip that positioned the barrel parallel to the arm, aimed straight forward. When you extended your arm naturally, as in a handshake or pointing or reaching out, the gun pointed exactly where you aimed your hand. You won't believe how SOE agents trained to use this weapon without accidentally shooting themselves. Using a sleeve gun required precise training and nerves of steel. The procedure went like this. First, load the weapon before the mission. This meant inserting a single round into the breech, typically done in a safe house or hideout. Once loaded, the sleeve gun was live. There was no safety mechanism. If you accidentally pulled the cord, it fired, period. Second, strap the device to your forearm, positioning it so the barrel extended just short of your wrist. The exact placement varied by individual. Taller agents wore it slightly higher, shorter agents lower, but the goal was always the same. When you extended your arm naturally, the barrel needed to point forward without creating an unnatural arm position. Third, thread the trigger cord. This was the most delicate part. The cord ran from the firing mechanism along the inside of your sleeve, across your chest or back, under your shirt, and down the opposite arm to your other hand. Some agents tied a small loop at the end that they could hook a finger through. Others wrapped it around their palm. The key was that pulling this cord, a sharp, deliberate tug, would release the striker. Fourth, approach your target. Extend your weapon arm naturally, offering a handshake, gesturing during conversation, reaching to open a door. The target saw nothing, just a hand, a sleeve, a normal human interaction. Fifth, at the moment of contact, when your hand touched theirs or when the barrel pressed against their body, pull the cord with your opposite hand. The gun fired directly into the target's torso, often through clothing at such close range that fabric and flesh muffled the already quiet report. 32 ACP round, while not powerful by military standards, was devastating at contact range. It penetrated deep, often striking vital organs or major blood vessels. And here's the horrifying brilliance. By the time the target realized they'd been shot, the shooter's hand was still clasping theirs. The weapon was still hidden. To witnesses, it looked like the target had suddenly collapsed during a handshake. Heart attack? Stroke? Medical emergency? The confusion bought precious seconds for the agent to disappear. Station 9 produced several variants of the sleeve gun, each optimized for different scenarios and agent preferences. The Mark I was the original design. Simple, reliable, single-shot, manually reloaded. 32 ACP rounds. Most OSS and SOE agents who used sleeve guns carried this variant. The Mark II introduced a slight improvement, a simplified loading mechanism that allowed marginally faster reloading in the field. Still single shot, but you could theoretically reload and rearm in about 15 seconds if you had privacy and spare ammunition. In practice, though, if you'd already fired once, your cover was blown and reloading was pointless. There were experimental variants with different calibers. 25 ACP rounds, weaker but even more compact. 380 ACP for more stopping power, but the increased recoil and louder report made these less popular. 32 ACP remained the standard, powerful enough to kill reliably, quiet enough not to immediately alert everyone in the room. The mounting systems evolved too. Early models used simple leather straps, but these could slip during movement. Later versions introduced spring clip mechanisms that gripped the forearm more securely. Some agents wrapped the entire assembly in medical gauze, making it look like they had a bandaged injury, perfect cover if someone noticed the bulge. One particularly clever variant was disguised as a medical device for diabetic injections. The barrel and mechanism were housed in a case that resembled an insulin injection kit of the era. If searched, an agent could claim they had diabetes and needed to carry the kit at all times. The German searchers, not wanting to confiscate vital medical equipment, often waved them through. But production numbers remained small. Why? Because the sleeve gun wasn't for every agent. It was for the specialists, the ones going into the deepest cover, the ones most likely to face intimate searches, the ones whose missions required killing at the moment of closest contact. SOE training facilities in Scotland and England included specific courses for sleeve gun operations. These weren't standard weapons training, they were psychological preparation for one of the most intimate forms of killing imaginable. Trainees first learned weapon safety. Because the sleeve gun had no safety mechanism and was always live when loaded, agents had to develop absolute discipline. Accidental discharges during training were not uncommon. At least 3 documented cases of agents shooting themselves in the hand or arm during practice. 32 round through his palm. After basic safety, trainees practiced the drawing motion. Except there was no drawing. Instead, they learned to extend their arm naturally while simultaneously pulling the trigger cord with the opposite hand. This required coordination and muscle memory. Pull too early and you'd fire before making contact. Pull too late and your target might notice the suspicious hand position of your opposite arm. The most psychologically challenging part? Training to maintain eye contact and natural conversation while killing someone. Instructors would role-play as targets, shaking hands with trainees while evaluating their demeanor. Could you smile, maintain a calm expression, and pull that cord simultaneously? Could you keep talking after firing, delaying the moment when your target realized what had happened? Some trainees failed this portion, not because they lacked courage, but because the psychological barrier of killing someone while looking them in the eye, while touching them, while pretending friendliness was too much. These trainees were reassigned to roles that didn't require such intimate violence. Those who passed received their weapons and their assignments. And they deployed into occupied Europe, where German officers, collaborators, and informants were about to learn that every handshake could be lethal. The sleeve gun's operational history is fragmentary. Many missions remain classified even today, and agents who use the weapon rarely survive to record detailed accounts. But the cases we know about paints a chilling picture. In Lyon, France, an SOE agent codenamed Matilda used a sleeve gun to eliminate a Vichy police inspector who'd identified several resistance safe houses. She approached him outside a police station, claiming to have information about resistance activities. During their handshake, she fired. The inspector collapsed. Matilda calmly walked away, and by the time other officers reached him, she'd vanished into the crowded street. The inspector died before he could describe his attacker. The weapon was never found. In Brussels, a resistance cell received 2 sleeve guns via a nighttime drop in early 1944. They used them to eliminate 2 Belgian collaborators who were feeding information to the German SD, the SS intelligence service. Both killings occurred in public spaces during what appeared to be friendly conversations. Witnesses reported that the victim simply collapsed mid-sentence, as if struck by sudden illness. In Holland, an OSS agent used a sleeve gun during a desperate situation. His cover had been blown, and he was being escorted by 2 Gestapo agents to their headquarters for interrogation. During the car ride, he managed to lean forward as if carsick, extended his hand as if bracing himself, and fired into the driver's back. The car crashed. In the confusion, the agent escaped. Not every mission succeeded. In Copenhagen, an agent attempting to use a sleeve gun during a handshake with a German officer accidentally fired prematurely when the target gripped his forearm during the greeting. The round went through the agent's own sleeve, missing the target entirely. The agent was captured within minutes and executed after interrogation. But even failed attempts achieved something. They spread fear. Word traveled through German intelligence networks about British agents with hidden guns that could fire during handshakes. The paranoia this generated was almost as valuable as the successful kills. By mid-1943, German counterintelligence agencies had become aware of the sleeve gun threat. Gestapo and SD internal memos warned officers about concealed wrist-mounted firearms used by Allied agents. The descriptions were vague because even when Germans found sleeve guns on captured or killed agents, the devices were so unusual that analysts struggled to understand them. Security protocols changed. German officers were instructed to avoid handshakes with civilians whenever possible, especially in occupied territories. Some adopted the Nazi salute exclusively, refusing any physical contact. Others began wearing thick gloves, reasoning that if they couldn't feel the contact, an agent couldn't position a contact weapon properly. During searches, Gestapo personnel began paying special attention to forearms and wrists. They'd grip suspects' arms, feeling for irregularities. They'd demand that subjects remove jackets and roll up sleeves. But the sleeve gun's small size meant that even thorough searches sometimes missed it. Wrapped in bandages and presented as a medical necessity, the weapon could pass inspection. The psychological impact was severe. German intelligence officers became paranoid about physical contact. One Gestapo report from Paris in 1944 documented an officer who'd become so fearful of handshakes that he refused all meetings with informants, insisting on written communications only. This degraded intelligence gathering effectiveness because informants, especially nervous ones, needed face-to-face reassurance. The sleeve gun had achieved what all psychological weapons aim for. It made the enemy afraid of normal human interaction. It turned routine social gestures into potential death sentences. And that fear, multiplied across thousands of officers and collaborators, became a weapon in itself. The sleeve gun wasn't perfect, far from it. It was one of the most dangerous weapons an agent could carry. Dangerous to the enemy, yes, but also to the agent themselves. First, there was the single-shot limitation. Fire once, and you were effectively disarmed until you could reload, which required privacy, time, and spare ammunition. In a confrontation, one shot might not be enough. If you missed, or if the target survived the initial wound, you had no follow-up capability. Second, the accuracy was terrible. The sleeve gun had no sights, no rifling in some variants, and no way to aim precisely. It was designed for contact shots, literally pressing the barrel against someone's body. At any distance beyond a foot, hitting your target became luck. One SOE after-action report described an agent who fired at an enemy from 3 feet away and missed completely. Third, the weapon was fragile. The firing mechanism was spring-loaded and could malfunction if the weapon was struck, dropped, or crushed. Several agents reported their sleeve guns failing to fire during critical moments. The striker had jammed or the spring had weakened from being cocked for too long. Fourth, and most dangerously, there was the constant risk of accidental discharge. You were wearing a loaded firearm on your arm, aimed forward, with a trigger that fired if you pulled it. Agents had to be consciously aware at all times not to accidentally tug the trigger cord. Adjusting clothing, reaching for objects, even stretching could trigger the weapon if you weren't careful. And fifth, if captured with a sleeve gun, the consequences were horrific. The Germans considered these weapons evidence of assassination intent, not warfare, but murder. Agents caught with sleeve guns were almost never treated as prisoners of war. They were tortured for information, then executed. Yet despite these risks, agents continue to request them. Why? Because in situations where conventional weapons were impossible to carry, the sleeve gun was the only option. It was a weapon of absolute last resort, and sometimes last resorts were all you had. After World War II ended, the sleeve gun largely disappeared from use. The OSS and SOE disbanded or transformed into new agencies, the CIA and MI6, and their wartime weapons were either destroyed or archived in secret facilities. Most sleeve guns were ordered destroyed. The weapons were too dangerous for civilian ownership and too specialized for military use. A few survived in museum collections. The Imperial War Museum in London has one on display, and the CIA Museum in Virginia reportedly holds several, though that collection is not open to the public. Interestingly, the concept never entirely died. During the Cold War, both CIA and KGB developed similar concealed firearms for assassination operations. 5mm weapons disguised as cosmetics. The CIA experimented with various miniature pistols, though details remain classified. The sleeve gun influenced modern self-defense technology too. Today's civilian last-ditch weapons, pocket pistols, derringers, and even certain less lethal devices owe intellectual debt to the SOE's philosophy. Extreme concealment, minimal components, deployment in situations where conventional weapons can't be carried. But the original SOE sleeve gun remains unique. No subsequent weapon has quite matched its combination of complete concealment and genuine lethality. And no subsequent weapon has carried quite the same psychological weight, the weapon that turned a handshake into an execution. Behind every sleeve gun kill was a moment of profound betrayal. The weapon required deception at the most intimate level, approaching someone with false friendliness, extending your hand in a gesture of trust or respect, then using that moment to kill them. For some agents, this was psychologically devastating. Post-war interviews with surviving SOE operatives revealed deep trauma. One agent, interviewed in the 1970s, described using a sleeve gun to kill a German officer and said he could still feel the man's handshake decades later. The warmth of his grip, the moment his expression changed from confusion to realization, the way he collapsed while still holding on. For others, the sleeve gun was simply a tool, no more morally complex than a knife or poison. These agents viewed their targets as enemies in a total war, and the method of killing was irrelevant compared to the strategic necessity. The ethical debates around the sleeve gun continue among historians. Was it a legitimate weapon of war or an assassination tool that crossed moral boundaries? The answer probably depends on your perspective on what warfare allows and what it prohibits. What's undeniable is that the sleeve gun forced both users and targets to confront the most uncomfortable truth about covert warfare. Sometimes, killing requires you to look someone in the eye, shake their hand, and pull the trigger while smiling. The sleeve gun never became famous like the Sten or the Thompson. It never appeared on propaganda posters or in victory newsreels. Most people who lived through World War II never knew it existed, and that was exactly the point. This was a weapon for the shadows, for the agents who operated without uniforms or recognition, who fought a war most people never saw. It was a weapon that embodied the SOE's mission, ungentlemanly warfare, fought with ungentlemanly tools against an enemy that had abandoned any pretense of rules. Was it effective? Absolutely. The sleeve gun killed targets that conventional weapons couldn't reach, in situations where conventional approaches would have failed. It spread fear through German intelligence networks. It gave agents a last resort option when capture seemed certain. Was it ethical? That's harder to answer. The sleeve gun required deception and intimate violence that many consider beyond the acceptable bounds of warfare. But then, so did the Nazi occupation. So did the Holocaust. So did total war itself. What the sleeve gun represented, more than any specific technical feature, was how far Britain was willing to go to defeat Hitler. They'd weaponize handshakes. They turned human contact into a killing method. They trained agents to smile while shooting. Because the alternative, accepting Nazi rule, abandoning resistance, surrendering to occupation, was unthinkable. The Germans called it dishonorable. Churchill called it necessary. History, as always, offers no simple judgment. But one thing is certain. After 1943, when German officers in occupied Europe were approached by strangers offering handshakes, more than a few must have felt their hearts race, their palms sweat, their hands hesitate before gripping. Because they'd heard the rumors, the whispers, the stories of colleagues who died during greetings, colleagues who'd collapsed during conversations, colleagues who'd been killed by weapons no one could see. The sleeve gun didn't win the war, but it won something perhaps equally valuable. It made the occupiers afraid of the occupied. It made every interaction a potential threat. It turned the simple human gesture of a handshake into a moment of terror. And sometimes, in war, terror is the most effective weapon of all. Handshakes killed in occupied Europe, but in the darkness beyond German sentries, an even deadlier British weapon was waiting. Hit subscribe. The shadows are just getting started. Handshakes killed in occupied Europe, but in the darkness beyond German sentries, an even deadlier British weapon was waiting. Next on World War II weapons, the silent British rifle that terrified German sentries at night. Hit subscribe. The shadows are just getting started.